I don't think we're necessarily getting to really honestly understand or face up to the depth of the problem. I mean, I've just finished reading Mike Berners-Lee's book, The Burning Question, as a fellow Kendal resident. And really it comes down to a very cold thing I've got to say. Somebody who owns a lot of fossil fuels through the ground has got to not exploit them. And that is going to lose them a very large amount of money. And that could be your money, or it could be my money. I don't have very much. What I have in a local government pension might still be there when I retire. But it might not be in this case. And the countries that do force their own fossil fuels owners not to extract that are going to be at a competitive disadvantage. So whilst it's great to do all the kind of demonstrating so that we want to do, and it gets the ideas that the problem's up there, we shouldn't underestimate that this is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I should think it's totally unprecedented in human history for this to be attempted. So I don't think it's quite right to be too aggressive about, we have to make it shocking. But we have to be realistic, surely, that this is a very, very big ask. We have to be rather grown up about how we ask for it. I'm sorry, that's not really a question, is it?
Yeah.
It's asking for comments on how we can show that we understand this is a problem, even while we're out there demonstrating and activism and everything we can think of.
Four hands. Do you want to take another couple? Yeah, go on.
Thank you very much. It was good to hear all these technical details, many of which, of course, we know. But what was highlighted here for me was that we are dealing with a political situation, not a technical situation. We're dealing with basically a battle between those who have the right to decide what to produce and who dictate to us what we have the right to consume, and the vast majority of us who don't have that right. And this is a political question, it's not a technical question, as it was discussed just now. And I'm wanting to know from Dorothy what she thinks, how we can make this clear at international political level, and Kirsty at the UK level, how to make this a political issue, not a technical issue. For me, that's the most important thing, and we're focusing too much on technical questions and not enough on the politics here.
Sam, do you want... Sorry.
Thanks. So you quite rightly pointed out, I think, the urgency of the situation. I'm just kind of, well, I'm not a climate scientist, I'm a scientist, so I've done a lot of study on climate change. But I think you're right, it's worse than all the science have been saying, right? So the ice sheets melting faster, the ice caps are going, we're seeing more storms, more floods than we'd expected for this amount of rain, etc., etc., etc. Not only that, CO2 emissions are going up far faster than have been said. We're following the worst case scenarios that any of the IPCC panels have looked at. They're the facts on the ground. So, and then the other thing here is, you know, and we're constantly asking ourselves, well, what's a politically realistic thing to ask for, right? How do you fit it in? And it seems to me that politics, if it's removed from reality, is completely useless. And that's me speaking as a scientist. And right now, like you said, we need, well, the IPCC is saying 40% cuts by 2020. Actually, if you ask researchers, for example, at the Tyndall Centre in Manchester here, I spoke with one just yesterday, he was saying actually that's false because that's not actually a properly equal distribution and everything. So actually the UK would have to have 70% cuts by 2020. That's 10% cuts year on year from now until then, carrying on up until 2030, when the UK would have to be effectively zero carbon. If we have to have even a 63% chance of not exceeding the 2 degree C target, at which point we start risking all the positive feedbacks. That could take us further out of our control. So not wanting to cancel despair and wanting to cancel radicalism, but basically I think we have to ask the most ambitious thing we can ask, because this is the only task that really matters for our generation. I happen to think I'm probably one of the youngest people in this room. So when we're looking at this is my future, right? And I would like to see more young people here today, because, for example, People on Planet are launching the Go Fossil Free campaign this year, which is trying to get universities to divest their fossil fuels. And I think supporting students and getting them involved is a really important thing to do, and showing them that this is their future. So sorry. And the other thing is, there's another campaign similar, is the Share Action campaign, which you might be aware of, and that's to help people move them, lobby share companies to move their money. But my fundamental last thing is, seeing as it's so urgent and we have to get a deal in order to move forward, if we're always trying to cling to equity as the defined thing, considering the scale of the challenge we're trying to meet, is that preventing us from actually getting a sustainable future and then working on equity later on? That would be the more challenging question.
Okay, I'm going to let Dorothy start by answering some of those questions. Yeah, no, it's correct, because what we're also saying, for those of us who's monitoring the negotiation, they're living in a bubble, they're living in a vacuum, which is too far from reality. Because they're talking about 2 degrees centigrade, when what is actually happening is 6 degrees centigrade. What we're actually facing, it's far bigger than what they're discussing. And although the big, even in the negotiation, the big elephant in the room is this equity question. Because as I mentioned, for people who are already suffering, which have not contributed much, if we think of sustainability, it should go hand in hand with giving justice and also transforming society. Because we've always been saying that, of course, we can reuse, we can recycle, everybody should recycle. But we can recycle for 100 years, but it will not change, because the problem is the system. That's why we've always been saying that it's not climate that must change, but it's the system that must change. Because a sustainable climate and capitalism doesn't match. Because when we think of the development paradigm, it's growth, growth, growth. And even with the green economy, the baseline is still growth. It's still how to develop, and not really discussing about the limits of the planet, the planetary limits, that we're saying as if we have another planet to conquer in the future, or another world, but we only have this one. And even the solutions that are being offered, all this market-based solution, from us, we're seeing it as a recolonization of the South. That the former colonizers, the way that they were successful in physically colonizing, is the same way of success that they're having now, one, in defining what's the problem, in defining what's the solution, and forcing developing countries to accept the market-based solutions. And in the many of the analogy, the biggest analogy that is being said, it's like an obese person asking a malnourished person to go on a diet, when the problem is the obese person should diet. But the idea is, if we combine the amount of intake, then maybe we will be even. So that's the first one. And the second, what are we doing in the developing countries? Since I mentioned that this is being linked now to many of the problems, the solutions that we are doing is also addressing the current problems that we're already seeing. For example, La Via Campesina, as Raj mentioned earlier, is already saying that food sovereignty is also the same instrument that peasant movements and collective peasants group can do to also answer or address the climate crisis. Because if they can decide, if they can determine what crops to produce, how to produce, if they can fight all the big agribusinesses, so by doing their work of working for food sovereignty, they're also helping address the climate crisis. The same with trade, because most of the free trade agreements that are going now, the investment provision there also says that corporations can now sue government. So in that aspect, if we can fight this, because if we would look, before 10 years ago, we're just talking of blue washing, that many corporations who are polluting, who are destroying the environment, they just do partnership work with UN offices, and they get blue, they become blue. But now they are right there, they're in the center. That in Rio +20 in Rio, during the business meeting, the CEOs that attended there are already saying, this is the actual meeting. The government meeting that is happening there, that's the side event. So they're not just being blue washed, they're in the center. The green economy is a product of Pravan Sukhdev, whose work in the last 15 years was in Deutsche Bank and Australia-New Zealand Bank. So all this idea that is being put now in addressing climate change is more of the same, more of the same approaches that have brought us in this crisis. So we're always saying we can't have an excuse but to change the system, because otherwise we can recycle, we can reuse stuff, but as long as the production of stuff and the consumption of stuff still remains the same, and we don't address justice, we don't address inequality, and we don't transform the way we live, then we will be facing the same problem again and again.
Thank you, Dorothy. I don't know if I've got all that much to add to that, except to say, I think, Maggie, I completely agree with what you were saying. It's really difficult. It is a massive challenge, and I think, we haven't really got a choice but to do everything we can, right? It's that's all I can say. It's a really tricky one, but at the same time, the alternative option is to watch the planet burn. So, and in terms of what we can do in the UK, in terms of getting this across, I think we just need to be really honest about where the power sits, and not hold back from not be shy to kind of be really honest with people when we're talking to people on the streets, when we're lobbying our MP, when we're writing letters to media, to really kind of cut the nonsense and just be straight and very direct. And people, I think we can credit people with the intelligence to understand what we're talking about, and I think that's the only way forward. I'm going to go for another round of questions. We've only got about 7 minutes left. So, Sam?
Thank you. I'm Nick Gilmore from Shrewsbury. Can you hear? You made a word out there, power. I think two things we can empower ourselves with. The lady who mentioned one of your questions about pension funds. My pension in Shrewsbury is invested all in nasty places. We need to find out where our money is. Our house insurance, car insurance, mortgage, etc., which bank. And if we can name and shame these companies that are dicking, why don't we do more of that, name and shame them? You didn't have them on your the mind. RBS, all the banks who are investing, we should be using our money as our power, one power. The other power we have, going to Dorothy, I'm a vegetarian, I'm vegan because of ethical grounds. The biggest polluter is meat, and in the world, and the planet, is our habit of eating meat and dairy. You can argue about that, but I've got the figures here from United Nations. That's the biggest single factor. You didn't mention the consumption of meat, and all the industry that goes with energy, water, insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, transport. It's massive, and most of the contented middle classes tend to ignore that, tend to ignore where their money's going, which bank account, and we're quite blindly, coming here, doing this, but our money is working over there. Big time. Thank you.
It's a question really, a couple of questions. One is about class, because clearly ordinary people in Britain don't benefit from the extraction of coal from Colombia at all. And just simple things like our houses need proper insulation. And the union, the CWU, supported a pamphlet I read a couple of years ago about creating 1 million green jobs, which I thought was a fantastic idea. You know, at the same time as attacking austerity, it also attacks some of the real inequalities in Britain. So that was one question. The second one is, how do the statistics work out? Because I've been going to China for the last 10 years, once a holiday. And one of the things I've noticed quite dramatically is a change in transport systems from overwhelmingly the cycle now to cars. And it seems to me the people who are benefiting are some of the rich people in China, but also firms like BMW, Volkswagen. I think every cab I've got in the last 10 years in China was a Volkswagen. So I wondered, you know, when we talk about the pollution involved in those cars, is it allocated to the German economy, the German ruling class, or is it allocated to the Chinese peasants who don't really benefit at all? I mean, the other thing is, if you take something like the Boris bike, which I think the idea of having cycles in major cities is a great idea, but not charging such huge amounts. What they should do, I think they should pay people to use bikes. You know, if you go to Leeds City Station, to park your bike costs money. You know, so if you cycle to the station, you have to then pay for somebody to look after your bike. What should happen is that you should park your bike, someone give you a fiver to do that. And I'll tell you, you start to readdress some of the inequalities in terms of transport.
Okay, I think if we can have one more question, probably a really quick one, just because we've got about 3 minutes left.
I was thinking maybe a woman would like to speak in front of men's voices, but maybe not. Is there any questions from anyone? Okay,
I've just got a quick provocative question about communities. You said that all these mining projects destroy communities, but don't mining projects also create communities? I mean, there's been a lot of concern in this country about the closure of pits destroying communities.
Okay, I want to address, well, first I will put on China. Considering the debate also that China is now becoming the second biggest emitter, and maybe before 2030 it will be the biggest emitter. And in fact, that will be confirmed by the fact that this year alone, it is expected that 20 million cars will be sold in China. 5 years ago, the figure is 1,000 new cars in Beijing road alone. So everybody, it's human nature. The Chinese have been using bikes. If you've been there in the 70s, in the 80s, everybody's using bicycle, wearing the same color of clothes. Now, everybody wanted to have a car. And in fact, it's like a status symbol that if you have some money, you now own a car. But what China is arguing is that they realize the danger of because also they have very limited resources. Their water is very limited. Drinking water is a problem in many areas. And the pollution level is so high that last January, they were already talking about air apocalypse. And this is a great leveler as well, because even if you're middle class, they don't talk about class in China, but those well-off, relatively well-off, and the poor are affected in the same way. And if you can see the air that you breathe, no amount of government spin can convince you otherwise that everything is okay. That in Weibo, that is their equivalent to Facebook and Twitter, with 800 million users, they're discussing about the fact that the PM 2.5, which is far more dangerous than the PM 10, reached a crazy level of 900, while the World Health Organization beyond the safe level is only 350. And with the calculation of most of the Chinese experts, they might need 18 years to address the problem. Some problems in China takes years to address because they have massive resources. But on one hand, China is also arguing that the level of measures that they're doing now, because it's also good for them to limit emission, is that they're acting more responsibly than many developed countries now when they are in the same level of development as China. And the fact that you have 1.3 million people who have desires and needs and new consumption habits is really a big challenge. In terms of policy, China in its 12 development plan has adopted a reduction of, for example, sulfur oxide, which is also another very dangerous particulates. They're reducing it from 350 to 10%, for example. And the thing with China is when the government puts its mind into it, it can happen, because it's a one, you know, the type of government that China has is when it wants something and it sees that it's for its own good, that will happen. Now we'll go to what can we do. One of the questions, well, part of lifestyle also is, of course, yeah, you have to choose what is the activities and the food that would use less energy. And that would also mean maybe eating locally and not requiring food to travel for hundreds and thousands of kilometers to reach your table. But also, for us, it's still important to address government. Of course, we can do our civil disobedience, we can do our climate camps, but it's also important to address government, and on a daily basis, because the negotiation, although it only happens in December, what is actually being discussed, if you push your government, it's a 24/7 job. Because not just in terms of more information dissemination, but also what will they say in the negotiation, what policies they will adopt. And at this point, there is still a big divide when it comes to how people really see nature. Because through human history, we view nature as something we need to conquer, something that we need to master, without realizing that if we have our human laws and human system, nature also has its own system that we need to respect and we need to recognize. And only with the balancing or the acceptance that we should not destroy nature, we should let rivers flow as it should be, therefore no dams or not very big dams, or if we make peace with how we relate with nature, which many of the indigenous people have been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years. But that requires a total overhaul of the way we think, the way we live, because it's a lifestyle issue. And also the fact that governments must start editing the lifestyle as well. What will be in the market? What will be available? How much transparency in government? And what kind of government is needed to really do regulation and follow policies that will be there? Do I forget something? I hope not. Otherwise, come to the last session.
Brilliant. We've gone over time. Just a couple of points on naming and shaming. We're just doing some research into pensions at the moment, to kind of look at where different pension funds sit in terms of fossil fuels. So you might find that interesting when we get there. We're also planning some kind of creative actions around naming and shaming banks. So yeah, we have every intention.
Because all these people have names and addresses. So.
Yes. And I'm sure you can come up with plenty of ideas yourselves about how to name and shame things. And if you do, then please let me know. And yeah, I mean, 1 million green jobs. Yeah, WDM has supported that. Vegetarianism. I think that's up to each of us as individuals. And in terms of destroying communities, it's a really interesting point that I'm sure we could have a long conversation about. It might be interesting to come to the mining session later this afternoon. But also, I mean, there's our latest copy of Action Magazine. If you look at a mine like this, like Cerrejón, where they've literally, it's an open cast mine where they've just taken the top of the land, there's no way a community can live in that. I think, but this article does actually look at the way that the policies of under the Thatcher government of closing down mines and opening up mines in Colombia at the same time kind of touches on that subject of destroying communities, either by closing down mines or opening them up. Could have a long conversation with you about that. Sorry if we missed some questions. And for the technology problems at the beginning, I'm going to have to call the session to a close.